in this section, we're gonna add another mapping, and this time it's gonna be a post mapping. So we're gonna add another mapping to the controller. It's gonna be a post mapping, and we're gonna be sending the same parameters. So we're gonna be sending the name and the last name, but as a post request in the body of the request. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and add a post mapping. So we're gonna go ahead and add a post mapping, and it's basically just a different annotation. So instead of a get mapping, the annotation is at post mapping. And then we're gonna have again a public response entity. So we're gonna return a response entity again, and we're gonna be returning in this case the same object again. And I'm just gonna say get test post just to make it different. And now we're not going to be going and adding the request parameters right here, because we're not going to be sending them like that. We're going to be doing something else, and we're going to create an object that's going to be received as a response, as a request body in this request, and we're going to create a post request through Postman, and we're going to test out the route. Now, as the same as we did for the response, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here in the resource package. I'm going to add another class that's going to be named test request, and this is going to have the same this is going to have actually basically the same two fields. I'm just going to add a private string name and a private string last name. In this case, I'll go ahead and generate all the constructors, getters, and setters. Let me just be in the class when I'm doing the generate thing. And I'm going to go ahead and add a constructor. I'm going to add another constructor. And I'm going to go ahead and add getters and setters. So I'm just going to go getter and setter, select all of the fields, and click OK. So now what we've done, we've basically created another Java class that's going to serve as our request. Let me just see where's our last name. Okay, it went here to the bottom. Let me just bring it up at the top, just so it's kind of consistent like that at the top here. So what have we done here? So we have another request object. In this case, we named it test request. And I'm gonna go back in the controller, and I'm gonna, instead of the request param, I'm gonna specify here request body. And this means that we're expecting the request body here. So the request body of the post request. And the request body is gonna be out of type test request, and it's just gonna have request. And this is how we specify the post request body and how we access that here in the mapping. So now we can do kind of the same thing. I can go ahead and return it back. So I can go ahead and let's say I can return the body that we receive. So the HTTP post request body, I can just say I'm going to return a response entity, and I'll just in this case not do any mapping. Oh, let's actually do mapping. So I'm gonna have to do, because I added that I'm gonna be returning the test response. So let me just create another test response. And in here, I'm gonna take from the request, I'm gonna take the name, and from the request, I'm gonna take the last name. And I'll return the test response again here. So now what do we have? So we have a post mapping. So this is gonna be mapped again to the API/test. So that's going to be the route that's going to get mapped to. So we got the get mapping here, but now we have an additional one, which is a post mapping. Now, in order to send post requests, what I'm going to be using is a tool named Postman. And in order to download and use this tool, you can go to Google and you can search for Postman. And this is the tool right here. So the Postman API platform. You can create an account, it's free, and you can download it. And you can use it on your depending on your operating system. So after you've downloaded and have it on your machine, what you can do is you can go ahead and create a new request. So you can click here, new, and you can choose an HTTP request. And in this case, it's going to create a new untitled request, like a brand new one. So Postman is a tool that's usually used for testing out APIs or for development of APIs, for easier testing of requests and all of those things. There are other tools, but for the purposes of this course, we are going to be using Postman. So you probably want to download this tool, or if you have something that you've been previously using, you can use that one. Feel free to use that one, but for the purposes of this course, we are going to be using Postman. So Postman, basically what I did here is I just created a simple GET request, but I will change that because we're going to want to send a POST request right now, because the mapping right now, the mapping that we want to have is a POST mapping. So we want to call this POST route right here. But before we do anything, let me just restart the application. And I'm going to get the request ready. So it's going to be HTTP localhost 8080, and it's going to be /API/test. Now we're going to go in the body section here, and this is where we specify the request body. So what do we send in the post request body? I'm going to go ahead and click the raw option here, and it's pre-selected JSON, but if it's not pre-selected, you can just come here and select JSON. And this is where we can specify our request body. So in this case, what we need to specify, this is our request body here, represented by this class, and it needs to have two fields, name and last name. Same story as with the test response. So the name here, these are going to be the keys in the JSON. So we need to have a key name. So we specify name, and that's going to be, let's say, test name. And now we specify another key that's going to be last name, and that's just going to be test last name, for example. So this is our JSON, and when we click send, what's going to happen is the request going to get sent to our application. Is going to get mapped to this controller, to the post endpoint, so to the post, and the body is going to get received here as a test request. We're going to generate a response and we're going to return it back. So that's the expectation. Let's go to Postman and let's send the request. So I just sent the request. We got back a status 200 OK. And as you can see, we're getting exactly that. So we're getting back the response with the name test name and with the last name test last name. I can change this. Let's say test name 2. And I can send it again. And as you can see, we're getting the response back there updated. So that's how we would change, that's how we would send a response body within a post request. Now let me just again show you the thing where we can name your field in the JSON using the JSON property. So I can just say JSON property is going to be name, is going to be, for example, let's say name JSON, for example. And now with this change like that, in the JSON, I would need to specify it with that. So I would need to specify it with name JSON, because the JSON property specifies how do we call the property in the JSON. So in this case, if I just specify like this name, that wouldn't work. I would have to specify name JSON. If I send it like that, I should retrieve it back. But let me bring it back to as it was. So I'm just going to remove the JSON property here. And I'm going to the JSON property right over there, and I'm going to restart the application. So that's kind of like a brief overview of how do we send a request body to a post request. So basically what's happening is we're using Postman, we're sending a post request to the API route, and this is the request body. It gets received in the mapping, and we just get the result back. So that's kind of how a post request works. Now that would be really the same. So that will be the same if we have like a put request, a delete request. So it kind of patch request. That's how would we do it. So basically it's the specific annotation here that we use in order to specify the mapping. Let me just show you how can we add an additional mapping here. So for example, this get mapping here, right? Let's add another. Let's copy this one. Let's copy this one, and let's say that I wanna. Because I didn't show you this in the previous videos, I did mention it, but I didn't show it. Let's copy that get test, and let's get test 2, and let's just return a static string. So let's just for now return a static string, test mapping 2. how you can specify another, like in the path, this is the base path here, API test. And if you want to specify something more after that, you can do it here in the actual mapping. So I can say /test2, for example. And now if I restart this, in order to access this, so I'm going to go ahead and create another request. It's going to be a GET request to the same route. But in this case, it's going to have another mapping test2. So let me just try to do that. I'm just going to click send. And as you can see, test mapping 2. Now that gets mapped to this thing here. Now it's really the same thing for a post mapping or for any other mapping. I did this just to demonstrate that's how would we do it, because we can specify it here. But yeah, that's more or less the scope of this video, was more to explain the post mapping, how to use the post mapping, and how to actually retrieve the request body and return it back. So that's what's the most important part of this for the scope of this video. So that's going to be it for this one. See you in the next one.